Disc jockey, drop the bass. Now the heads.
You know what I just realised? Shit. But anyway, that's just a little levity, I suppose. Because I want to talk about something weird. And something that's easy to misinterpret. And I really don't want people to misinterpret it. And I don't want to come across as being too serious and preachy. But I've had this idea going around in my head for a little while. What if skepticism is an altered state of consciousness? Now, I can feel you recoiling from the very idea, but think it through with me, okay? We know that there are altered states of consciousness. You can access them through drug use, meditation, and so on. You know, when you're in extreme pain, you can enter a dissociative state. You know, there are other states of consciousness, and these can be good, and they can be bad. They can allow you to access parts of your mind and associations of things that you wouldn't normally. So things like psychedelics are really good for sparking creativity because they create all kinds of associations that you might not otherwise have, and you can access some kind of profound connections between concepts and words that you might not otherwise. You know, creative people are famous for abusing substances, and those altered states from those various substances can influence your ability. There were writers like me, they did a study, and while artists are associated with mental illness, it's only writers that it's true for, of course, and that tends to be depression. So, you know, there's something there. If we look at profoundly religious people, you know, transcendent religious experiences are associated with temporal lobe epilepsy, differences in the structure of the brain. Might that also be true of skepticism? It seems reasonably likely. So on the one hand, we've got natural variation. Some people are more skeptical than others, some people are more trusting than others. What this probably boils down to is different scales of pattern recognition. Michael Shermer gives this famous example where, when in our primitive ancestry, when you heard a rustle in the leaves, was it a predator or was it just the wind? You know, those who associated it with intention, with a predator stalking them, and overreacted were more likely to survive than those who brushed it off, because sometimes it was a predator. So there's this evolved tendency in humans, not only because of that, but because we're a social species, to see patterns, even where patterns don't necessarily exist, and to see intention, even where intention doesn't normally exist. And this is where a large part of magical thinking comes from. And you can demonstrate this in pigeons and things as well as humans. You can get pigeons to develop superstitions about when the seed will fall. It's a thing that happens. So if there's natural variation in this pattern recognition, and most people are at the higher end of that scale, and a certain percentage of people are at a lower end of the scale where they don't see these patterns all the time. They don't see intention where it doesn't exist. They don't see signs and portents and relate things that are unrelated to each other. In the past, that would have been a weakness. They would have been eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, but in modern times, the weakness is possibly seeing patterns where they don't exist, even though that's useful in a social situation to be hyper-aware, and we live in a much more social society. There's some hints around about how rare this might be. Even in very religiously liberal, tolerant societies like those found in the West, about 75% of people will end up in the same religion as their parents. And that roughly holds true for political affiliation as well. So only a small number of people will move away from that, 25%. Of that 25%, most make only a modest defection. So they might move from Baptist to Pentecostal. That sort of thing. It's not a big difference or a change, however big it might feel to them at the time. So that leaves maybe 10-12% of people that give up on the whole thing of religion, or make a major defection. It doesn't happen that often. And this ties somewhat to Persinger's God helmet. The Persinger's God helmet is this apparatus you put on your head, and it subjects your brain to magnetic waves, stimulating in all kinds of ways. many ways it's kind of like an artificial psychedelic, very, very mild, but it's attempting to alter your brain, basically, temporarily through magnetic waves. About 80% of people report some kind of spiritual experience while in the God helmet. You know, they feel a presence, or they feel like they're being watched, or it can vary. Some people have much stronger reactions, again associated with certain brain structures, which are also, again, associated with temporal lobe epilepsy. But about 20% of people, nothing happens. Richard Dawkins put on the God helmet, nothing happened. And this isn't exact. You know, there are non-religious people who get in the apparatus and have an experience, and there are religious people who get in the apparatus and don't, but it's still suggestive that there's something going on there. So that's natural tendency, but we also know that brains can change. There's neuroplasticity. You know, London cab drivers have different brain structures to normal people because of the knowledge. You know, they get kind of like a neurological map of London imprinted on their brain. We know that people who meditate regularly have altered brain structures compared to those who don't, and that this changes over time. So a practice can alter your brain structure, can alter your outlook, can alter you the way you see the world. So it's also possible that, as well as this natural variation, the practice of being skeptical may lay down new neural pathways and alter your consciousness on a permanent basis. And that's interesting, isn't it? That we may be altering our brains, altering our perception by being skeptical. And that may be why skeptics can be hard to relate to by normal people, in the same way that gurus can be hard to relate to, or people who have devoted their lives to New Age nonsense and so on can be hard to relate to, because they've altered their brains. Their brain no longer works in the same way as everybody else. And that's why skeptics can perhaps seem distant or impersonal. The objectivity can be bad socially. Though I would still argue that skepticism is a multi-tool that can be used for just about anything, because if you want to change anything in the world, you have to start from a basis of truth, because otherwise it's not going to work. And once it's undermined, that's it all goes. You have to start from a basis of truth. So I'd argue that skepticism is perhaps the most useful altered state of consciousness. Are there drugs and practices that can enhance or increase skepticism in the same way that there are drugs that can enhance and expand creativity? It's an interesting thought. I don't know. Amphetamines, perhaps? People talk about nootropics, but those are more about enhancing and compensating for exhaustion of the brain, rather than laying down new structures or accessing altered states. But it's something interesting to think about, and something perhaps that we've seen in fiction. If you think about the Mentats in Dune, what are they but hyper-advanced skeptics operating under an altered state through drugs and training? I guess it's kind of an out there idea. I'm looking for evidence of it. There is some evidence of differing brain structures in skeptics, and in hyper-religious people, and in people who meditate, and in people who have any kind of really hard discipline differences in their brains. So might this be something that's true? Might it be something worth exploring? I think so. I think it's an interesting thought. And the unfortunate thing, of course, is that it then draws parallels with religious and spiritual practice. If you can look at someone like Hitchens or Dennett or Dawkins or Harris or Shermer, as gurus of this skeptical altered state, which is unfortunate because we don't want to draw parallels. I think there's a difference. I think it's more of a practice, and because it relates to reality, it must necessarily be grounded in reality. So that's the counter if anyone tries to bring that up. But it's interesting to think about. You got any ideas? Is coffee? Are stimulants things that aid this altered state, that allow you to concentrate and think clearly? Is that the same thing? I don't think it's quite the same thing. What makes reality more real? We have all these drugs that take us away from reality, but Are there any that fix us upon it, make us alert and aware and present in the moment? Well, let me know what you think. It's a kind of out there idea, I suppose, but it's been rattling around in my head for a while. Take care, guys. If you like what I do here, please like, subscribe. You can find me on social media, on Twitter at Grimachu, James Desborough on Facebook, James Grim Desborough on G+. My main website is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com. If you want to help me out with a little money, which will go to support my games, writing and other projects, you can do so at Patreon, which is also Grimachu.